My stepbrother once said that being late was a sign of weakness. He said it with that clipped military tone of his, the kind that didn't need volume to make the air go still. I grew up learning to measure time like it was oxygen, like one delay could suffocate everything. But on that damp May evening in Fayetteville, with the clock reading exactly 1700 and his promotion ceremony starting at 1730 at Fort Liberty, I broke that rule. I stopped walking. I turned my head toward the station bench and saw him. He was sitting alone under the dim light, a man wrapped in a tattered coat shoulders, hunched against the chill. The wind carried the low rumble of the approaching train. I could smell wet concrete rain lingering from the afternoon storm. His hair was gray, his hands trembling slightly. Then I saw it, catching a flash of light from the platform lamps. Dog tags hanging against his chest. A Marine. My breath hitched before I could reason it out. I felt the weight of my stepbrother's voice in my head saying, "Do not be late. You embarrass me and you embarrass the family." That sentence had been drilled into me so often it felt like an order carved into my bones. I should have walked away. I should have prioritized punctuality. That was the rule. Instead, I walked toward the bench. The veteran looked up at me slowly as if unsure whether I was real. His eyes were pale blue and startlingly clear. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice hoarse but steady. I asked him if he was all right. He gave a small laugh, the kind that carries no humor at all. "Just cold," he said softly. "Missed the line at the shelter." His words sat heavy in the air. My hand went to the zipper of my field jacket almost on instinct. I remembered the last thing my father had said before leaving for Iraq years ago. "Never walk past someone wearing the same creed you swore to uphold." The words surfaced without warning. I slid the jacket from my shoulders and handed it to him. "Here," I said quietly. "You need it more than I do." He stared at me for a second like the world had paused. Then he took it carefully as though it was something sacred. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he murmured. "Semper Fi." The sound of those two words pulled at something deep in my chest. I looked at the clock. 17:10. Every second now would cost me. I could already hear Ryan's voice, sharp and cutting the disappointment thick as smoke. But I didn't move. I pulled a protein bar from my bag and handed it to him too. He hesitated, then accepted it like someone who hadn't been offered kindness in a long time. When I finally stepped away from the platform, the distant train horn echoed against the low clouds. My shoes slapped the wet pavement. Every beat matched the pounding in my chest. My heart knew I had just crossed a line I could not uncross. Fort Liberty was less than a mile away. Normally, that walk calmed me, but now every step felt like it was counting down to impact. My stepbrother Ryan Archer had spent his entire life teaching me about control, about how image meant survival. He was being promoted to Sergeant First Class that night, a rank he believed proved he was the family's golden soldier. I had promised I would be there on time. I had rehearsed it like a mission. I even ironed my uniform twice, lined every crease. Everything was supposed to be perfect. Instead, I had made a choice he would never understand. I thought about the way Ryan's jaw clenched when anyone threatened his spotless image. I remembered the time he told me in that low, controlled voice of his that family should know when to step back and let the real soldier shine. I was never the kind of sister he wanted to stand beside him. He saw me as the reminder of what he wasn't. I was the daughter of a soldier who died a hero, and he was the one who lived in that shadow. I didn't fully understand it then, but this moment would become the crack that made everything else collapse. I knew exactly what it would cost me. His rage didn't need words. It never did. That night, kindness would break more than a rule. It would break a family. What would you have done if it were you? Be honest. People like to say families are built on love. Ours was built on rules. I was 10 years old the first time I realized that love in the Archer house came with conditions. Richmond, Virginia, spring sunlight pouring through the windows, the scent of lemon polish and old wood filling the hallway. My father's photograph in his Marine uniform hung on the wall like a silent promise. By then, he'd been gone 2 years, killed in Iraq. My mother remarried quickly to a man named Daniel Archer, a man with a house too large and a voice too smooth. He came with a son, Ryan, 2 years older than me. The day they moved in my life split in half. Ryan was the golden child from the moment he stepped through the door. Blonde hair, square jaw straight, a student, future soldier. I was the quiet girl who wore my father's old dog tags like a shield. From the beginning, the difference was obvious. When Ryan spilled juice on the carpet, Daniel laughed it off. When I forgot to close the pantry door, I was told to show some discipline. When Ryan got into a fight at school, it was because boys will be boys. When I raised my voice once I was told a proper young woman doesn't talk like that. My mother stood in the kitchen that first year, her hands always busy, her eyes always avoiding mine. She told me Ryan needed support, that he had lost a mother young, that I should make an effort. What she didn't say was that the entire house revolved around his moods. If Ryan was in a good mood, the house felt quiet. If he was angry, the house held its breath. Even back then, I understood that my place was to fit around him like furniture. When Ryan joined JROTC in high school, Daniel threw a backyard barbecue like he had just won a war. Neighbors clapped him on the back. My mother beamed. Ryan stood at the center of the yard in his uniform while I handed out lemonade like the help. He liked it that way. Every success he had became proof that he was the future of the family. Every step I took away from that script was treated as betrayal. I remember the night I told my mother I wanted to join the military. She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. "That's Ryan's path," she said. "You should find your own, something appropriate." Appropriate meant invisible. Appropriate meant safe. Appropriate meant letting Ryan be the star. When I told her I wanted to be like my father, she shook her head. "Your father was different. Ryan can handle that life." Ryan overheard that conversation. Later in the hallway, he leaned against the wall with that crooked smirk he used whenever he wanted to make me feel small. "You'll quit after basic," he said. "You don't have what it takes." I stared back at him, my hands tight at my sides. I didn't say anything because by then I already knew that words against Ryan Archer always cost me something. The first time I saw him lose his temper, I was 12. He'd come home from school angry. I had left my books on the kitchen counter. He slammed his hand down, shouting about discipline. Daniel didn't stop him. He looked at me and said, "He's just trying to teach you responsibility." That was the day I learned that silence in that house didn't mean safety. It meant permission. Years later, when I graduated high school and enlisted, my mother didn't hug me. She looked at my duffel bag and said, "Ryan won't like this." Not a word about pride. Not a word about courage. Only about him. He was already on his way to becoming the Star Marine son. Every phone call home turned into an update about his promotions, his leadership roles, his perfect image. My own achievements were footnotes, public affairs, community operations. My mother once said, "That's nice, honey," the same tone she used when complimenting a neighbor's pie. Ryan made sure to remind me that his job involved combat and mine involved speeches. He liked the hierarchy because he always ended up on top. By the time I turned 26, the rules of the house had been burned into me like a brand. Do not outshine Ryan. Do not embarrass Ryan. Do not stand between Ryan and the image he's built. And above all, do not expect anyone to protect you from him. The last time I visited home before that May evening, he made a toast at the dinner table. A promotion was coming, a big one. He stood tall in his pressed uniform, raising his glass with a grin that never quite reached his eyes. "I'll make the family proud," he said. Then he turned his gaze to me, still smiling. "And some of us can just stay in our lanes." My mother laughed. Daniel nodded. No one saw the way my hands curled into fists beneath the table. No one cared. I understood then what I had known all along. In this family, my silence was expected. His spotlight was sacred. That night, as I lay in my childhood room surrounded by boxes of his trophies and my father's photo hanging silently on the wall, I made myself a quiet promise. One day, the rules that kept him untouchable would break. One day, I would stop playing my part in his perfect little story. I didn't know when that day would come. I only knew it was inevitable. The night before Ryan's promotion ceremony hung heavy like a storm that everyone felt but no one mentioned. The air at Fort Liberty was damp and warm, the kind of heat that made uniforms stick to your skin. I arrived just before sunset, my duffel slung over my shoulder boots, echoing against the sidewalk outside the Archer house. It was the same house they'd bought years ago when Ryan first enlisted, tucked neatly into one of those perfect suburban neighborhoods built to look like everything inside was in order. The porch light was already on, casting a soft amber glow that felt more like surveillance than welcome. When I stepped through the door, the smell of roast chicken and polished wood hit me like a memory I never wanted back. Ryan was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed dress shirt perfectly ironed, his posture straight as if he was still standing in formation. He looked me up and down with that slow, deliberate disapproval he had perfected over the years. "You made it," he said flatly. "On time." "Good." I forced a small smile and set my bag down. "Yeah, on time." His lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Don't embarrass me tomorrow. You know how punctuality works in the Army. This isn't one of your little community events." I felt the heat crawl up my neck but kept my voice calm. "I know what punctuality means, Ryan. I'm an officer, not a civilian volunteer." His eyes narrowed, but before he could bite back, my stepmother appeared in the doorway. She still wore the same pastel cardigans. She always had her hair pinned in the same stiff style. Her voice came soft, as if she were keeping the peace, but every word was a quiet blade. "Ryan, she just got here," she said gently. "Don't start with her." Then she turned to me. "You should try to rest tonight, dear. Big day tomorrow. For all of us." Her emphasis on all of us felt deliberate. I nodded, though we both knew tomorrow wasn't about me. It was about him. It had always been about him. Dinner was set at the same long wooden table where I had spent too many teenage nights swallowing my words. Ryan had already placed his promotion uniform on the chair beside him, the stripes perfectly pressed boots gleaming on the floor. He had arranged them that way on purpose. He wanted me to see them. My stepmother passed the mashed potatoes with that practiced smile while Ryan leaned back like a man about to deliver a speech. "Tomorrow's big," he said, carving his chicken slowly. "Sergeant First Class. Took a lot to get here. Not everyone has what it takes to handle combat units. Some of us didn't choose the easy path." The jab landed exactly where he wanted it to. I didn't flinch, not on the outside. On the inside, my jaw tightened. Public affairs isn't the easy path, but to Ryan, if you weren't kicking down doors, you weren't real military. "Some of us choose to work with our brains," I said lightly, taking a sip of water. He tilted his head, pretending to consider my words. "Brains are good," he said with mock approval. "But let's be honest, combat earns respect. Paperwork doesn't." My stepmother let out a light laugh as if he had said something charming. "Ryan's right, Sloane. You've always been good with people. That's valuable too. Just different." Her tone was sugar, but I could hear the iron underneath. The way she said different meant lesser. Ryan watched me carefully, waiting for me to snap, but I didn't give him that satisfaction. I'd learned a long time ago that silence irritated him more than anger. "You'll be sitting with family tomorrow," he continued, his voice turning clipped and controlled. "Don't be late. Don't bring attention to yourself. This isn't about you." I set my fork down and met his eyes evenly. "I know it's not." That wiped the smirk from his face for a second, just long enough for something sharp to flash behind his expression. My stepmother reached out, touched his arm lightly like she always did when he got close to losing his cool. "Ryan," she said softly, "tomorrow is going to be perfect. Let's not ruin it with petty things." Petty things. That was how she always described my existence. Petty. A detail to be managed, never a person to be heard. The rest of dinner passed in long stretches of silence broken only by Ryan's carefully placed boasts. He talked about his unit like it was his personal army, about how his commanding officer praised his leadership, about how this promotion would finally give him the authority he believed he was born for. I let him talk. I let him build his empire of words. But in my chest, something quiet and sharp was settling. I'd felt it before in high school when he had called me weak. In basic, when I pushed through the mud and remembered every insult. In every phone call when he reminded me that he would always be one rank above me. He thrived on hierarchy. He needed it like air. He needed me beneath him. After dinner, he stood and straightened his shirt like a man about to address a room full of subordinates. "I need to get some sleep," he said. "Big day tomorrow. Some of us have to lead." He let the words hang. My stepmother smiled sweetly at him, then turned to me. "Don't stay up too late, Sloane. You'll want to look presentable." I climbed the stairs to the guest room that had once been mine. It still smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. The walls were lined with framed photos of Ryan in uniform. Ryan at basic. Ryan overseas. Ryan on a podium. My father's picture was gone from the hallway. I stared at the empty space where it used to hang. It wasn't an accident. It never was. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the house settle around me. Downstairs, I could hear Ryan's laugh and my stepmother's soft hum. It was the sound of a family built around one man's reflection. That night, as I looked at the ceiling, I felt the weight of the next day pressing down like a loaded pack. It was supposed to be his moment, and all I had to do was disappear quietly in the background. But deep down, something in me whispered that nothing would stay quiet for long. The night of the ceremony smelled like rain and iron, the kind of thick air that sticks to your skin and refuses to let go. I got off the train at 17:42. I should have been at the ceremony 15 minutes earlier, standing in the family section like a neat piece of decoration, smiling for photographs, pretending the world was in perfect order. Instead, I was running. My boots slapped against the wet pavement as I cut through the streets toward Fort Liberty. The sky was bruised gray clouds low, the wind sharp. Every second on my watch felt like a punch. Ryan's words echoed in my head like a drumbeat. "Don't be late. Don't embarrass me." The closer I got, the more the world narrowed into a tunnel of sound, my heartbeat, my breath, the squeak of wet fabric. At 17:48, I passed the main gate, flashing my ID to the guard, forcing myself not to sprint across the parade field. My uniform was still neat, but my collar was damp, my hair slightly frizzed from the humidity. The speakers were already playing the anthem when I reached the back of the gathering. I froze for half a second. The promotion ceremony was already in progress. Rows of soldiers stood perfectly aligned dress uniforms, immaculate boots polished to mirrors. The commanding officer was at the podium. Ryan stood front and center, his chest-out ribbons gleaming under the floodlights. I scanned the crowd, searching for an empty seat, but the family section was already full. Faces turned toward the stage like worshippers at an altar. When I finally stepped forward, the wooden floor of the viewing platform creaked beneath my boots. Heads turned, people noticed. It was impossible not to. My heart pounded against my ribs like a warning. 18 minutes late. My stepmother caught sight of me first. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. Her eyes flashed something cold sharp, almost triumphant. Ryan had warned me. She'd done nothing to help me. That was always her way. When I found a spot at the far end of the row, the commanding officer was already handing Ryan the ceremonial folder, his voice booming through the microphone about leadership integrity and responsibility. Ryan saluted sharply. Perfect posture, the picture of discipline. Then he turned his head. Just slightly. His eyes met mine across the crowd. If looks could break glass, mine would have shattered. But his burned. There was no mistaking it. Fury. Cold, controlled, silent fury. I stood straighter, but it didn't matter. In that single glance, I knew exactly what was waiting for me once the applause died down. The ceremony felt longer than it was. Ryan's name rang out with the kind of praise that makes men feel invincible. Sergeants barked approval, soldiers clapped, the commanding officer shook his hand. Ryan lifted his chin higher with every cheer, and I stood on the fringe, soaked in the quiet humiliation of being exactly where he didn't want me to be. Late, visible, imperfect. When the ceremony ended, families surged forward. Cameras flashed. There were hugs, handshakes, laughter. I stayed back, not because I wanted to, but because the air between Ryan and me was already charged like a live wire. I saw him standing near the front with the CO and a few other NCOs. His uniform was spotless, his face carved into the perfect image of a model soldier. But his eyes never softened. Not even for a second. He looked at me like I'd just drawn blood in front of the entire base. My stepmother reached him first, wrapping her arms around him, whispering something I couldn't hear, but could imagine perfectly. Probably about how she had warned me about how I'd ruined his big moment. He nodded once, stiff and tight. Then his eyes found me again. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The fury was a live thing pulsing just under the polished surface. Soldiers and their families moved around us like water around a stone, their laughter and congratulations creating a noise that made his silence feel heavier. I could feel it pressing against my skin, that weight of being the disappointment he'd always accused me of being. I thought for a second about walking up to him saying something to diffuse it. Maybe a quiet, congratulations, maybe an apology I didn't owe. But I didn't move. He wouldn't have heard me anyway. His pride was too loud. When the commanding officer clapped him on the shoulder and walked away, Ryan didn't follow. He just stood there, hands at his sides, staring straight through me. The lights from the parade field cast sharp lines across his face, making his jaw look like it had been carved from stone. I had seen him angry before, but this was different. This wasn't the loud rage of teenage Ryan slamming doors. This was quiet, deliberate, grown rage, the kind that waits. I shifted my weight, feeling the damp fabric of my uniform cling to my back. He finally started walking toward me, not fast, not slow, just steady like a man rehearsing every word he planned to throw. But before he reached me, one of his fellow NCOs stepped in, clapping him on the back, dragging him toward a group waiting to celebrate at the officers' club. He turned his head once more before disappearing into the crowd. No words, just that same burning look. My stepmother walked past me on her way to the parking lot, the heels of her shoes clicking sharply against the pavement. She didn't bother lowering her voice. "You always find a way to make it about you, Sloane." I didn't answer. I just stood there watching the crowd thin out, feeling the storm settle over me like a second skin. When the last of the applause faded, the night grew quiet. The lights buzzed overhead, and even in the silence his fury stayed hanging in the air between us like a warning. I had been 18 minutes late, but to Ryan Archer, that was enough to make me the enemy. The rain had already started falling by the time the last car left the parade field. It wasn't heavy, just that thin, misty kind that clings to everything and makes the night feel colder than it should. The parking lot behind the officers' quarters was half lit, the kind of place where sounds travel slowly and everything feels quieter than it should. I walked across the pavement boots, sliding slightly on the slick surface, my head still buzzing from the way Ryan had stared at me after the ceremony. I could feel his fury like static in the air. I knew he would find me eventually. When I reached my car, the headlights snapped on behind me, harsh and white, cutting through the mist. I turned slowly. Ryan stood there in his dress uniform, cover-off sleeves, wet, his hair slightly damp from the rain. He didn't move at first. He just stared at me like the world had shrunk down to this patch of concrete. 18 minutes, he said, finally, his voice low-flat. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Do you have any idea what that looked like? He continued. Do you have any idea what it means to show up late to my promotion ceremony, in front of command, in front of everyone? His voice wasn't loud yet, but it was cutting. He stepped closer, his boots splashing in a shallow puddle. You humiliated me, Sloane. My hands clenched at my sides. I was late, I said evenly. I didn't make a speech about you. I didn't ruin your ceremony. I walked in late. That's all. His face tightened, a muscle jumping in his jaw. That's all, he repeated. You don't get it. You never have. You've been a thorn in my side since the day you showed up in this family. Always so damn stubborn. Always so self-righteous. I took a small step back, the rain soaking through my collar. Ryan, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. You're overreacting. That was the spark. I saw it in his eyes before I even finished the sentence. He closed the distance in 3 strides, his finger jabbing toward my chest. Overreacting, he hissed. You made me look weak, in my moment, in front of my unit. My CO had to shake my hand while everyone watched my little stepsister stroll in like she forgot what discipline is. You don't get to do that to me. I could smell the sharp scent of his aftershave mixed with rain, the heat of his breath cutting through the cold. This isn't about you, I said quietly. That made him laugh, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind that's sharp and jagged and dangerous. It's always about me. You made it about me the second you walked in there. Do you know what they'll say now? Sergeant Archer's little sister can't even show up on time. If she's that undisciplined, what does that say about him? His voice rose now, no longer controlled, bouncing off the metal cars around us. "You've been riding on that last name your entire life. I built the name Archer. Not you. Me." I could feel my heartbeat climbing up my throat. The mist turned to steady drizzle pattering on the pavement, sliding down my hairline. I took another step back, but he followed. "You're embarrassing." He said the words quiet again, but sharper than anything else he'd said. "Always have been. You think anyone takes your job seriously? Public affairs speeches and smiling for cameras. You're a mascot, Sloane, and tonight you reminded everyone of that." Something in me snapped small but real. "Then why does it bother you so much if I'm not a threat?" I asked. The moment the words left my mouth, the air changed. He didn't yell. He didn't hesitate. He moved. His hand slammed into my shoulder, shoving me back against the wet hood of my car. The impact wasn't bone-breaking, but it stole my breath. My head snapped against the cold metal, a dull thud cutting through the sound of the rain. For a second, everything blurred at the edges. "You don't talk to me like that," he said, his voice low, shaking with rage. "You will never talk to me like that." I pushed off the car, breath ragged. "You think this makes you strong," I spat. "It just proves exactly what you are." His eyes flashed, and this time he didn't shove me. He swung. The back of his hand caught me across the face, hard enough to send me stumbling sideways into the puddle between two cars. The concrete was slick. My boots slid. My head hit the ground. The world spun. For a few seconds, there was no sound, just the bright white ringing in my ears. The headlights blurred into long streaks of light, the rain falling in slow motion. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed. A voice shouted something I couldn't quite catch. Footsteps echoed across the lot. Ryan's breathing was rough, uneven. He stood over me, fists clenched, chest heaving like a man who didn't know how to pull himself back. And then there was another sound. A steady, calm voice cutting through the rain. "Sergeant Archer." It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Ryan froze. I blinked against the water in my eyes and saw a figure at the edge of the lot. Staff Sergeant Torres. He had been at the ceremony. He saw everything. His posture was rigid, his eyes locked on Ryan. For a second, nobody moved. Then Ryan stepped back, the rage slipping from his face like water off glass. He straightened his uniform like that could erase what he'd just done. But it couldn't. The world tilted sideways again, a flash of pain lancing through my skull. Darkness crept at the edges of my vision. The last thing I saw was Torres moving toward me, his boots splashing through the puddles, and Ryan disappearing into the rain. When I opened my eyes again, the world was white. The steady hum of fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell of a military hospital room, the crisp sheets beneath my hands. I stared at the ceiling, the memory of rain still clinging to my skin. If it were your family, would you stay silent? The first thing I felt when I woke up was the weight of silence. It wasn't the soft kind that lets you rest. It was the kind that sits on your chest, presses into your ribs, and reminds you you're completely alone. The hospital room at Fort Liberty was small, white, and sterile. A single monitor beeped softly beside my bed. There was a faint smell of antiseptic and wet fabric, as if the rain from last night had followed me in. My jaw ached. My temple throbbed. When I raised a hand to touch the side of my face, I flinched. The bruise was already blooming beneath my skin, spreading like a shadow. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the faint echo of boots in the hallway. Nobody knew I was here except the medic who'd checked me in after Torres called it in as a possible fall. Not an assault. A fall. That was how the report was written. I didn't correct it. I should have, but I didn't, because the first thing that flashed in my mind wasn't justice. It was the look on my commander's face if this became official. Family drama. That's what they'd call it. The phrase alone was enough to choke me. Soldiers didn't want to be in the middle of someone's personal mess. Promotions were earned on discipline and clean records. Drama families didn't get respect. I couldn't let my name be whispered in hallways as the officer who couldn't keep her house in order. So I stayed quiet. I told the medic I'd slipped on the wet pavement, hit my head. He didn't look convinced, but he wrote it down anyway. Paperwork was easy when everyone wanted things simple. When I walked out of the hospital the next morning, the bruise on my cheekbone had turned a darker shade. My ribs ached when I inhaled too deeply. The base was bright, loud, alive. Soldiers running drills, vehicles humming in the distance. The world moved on like nothing had happened. At the Archer house, my stepmother opened the door with her perfectly rehearsed smile. Her eyes flicked over my face once. The smile didn't falter. "Why did you provoke him?" she said softly, like she was commenting on the weather. No greeting, no question about the hospital, just blame neatly packaged in 6 words. I stared at her for a long moment, waiting for some sign of maternal instinct, some flicker of concern. There was nothing. "I didn't provoke him," I said quietly. She tilted her head like I was a child refusing to apologize. "Sloane," she said, "you know how he gets when you push him. You should have just let him have his night. He worked so hard for it." Her voice was warm. Her words were poison. "He hit me," I said flatly. She sighed. "Families fight. You're both adults. Don't turn this into something bigger than it needs to be. He has a career on the line. You don't want to ruin that, do you?" That was how it always worked. She spoke in gentle tones, but every sentence was a warning. I walked past her without answering. Ryan was already in the living room, dressed down in a t-shirt and jeans, sipping coffee like he hadn't slammed me into concrete less than 12 hours earlier. When he looked up, he didn't look guilty. He looked smug, confident, whole. My bruise was visible. His wasn't. That was the power he held. "Hey," he said casually. "You good?" I stared at him, unable to find words. "Don't give me that look," he added, leaning back on the couch. "We both know you're not going to say anything. You wouldn't dare." It wasn't even a threat. It was a fact. He knew the system. He knew the way whispers could kill a career faster than paperwork. I walked out before I put my fist through something. Back on base, everything felt louder. The salutes, the cadence, the clipped commands. It was like the world wanted to drown out what had happened. I moved through my shift like a ghost. No one asked about the bruise. No one wanted to. A few soldiers looked at me a second too long, but their eyes slid away just as quickly. In the Army, everyone knew when not to ask questions. I kept my head down, signed reports, and pretended my jaw didn't hurt every time I spoke. But silence doesn't erase bruises. It just buries them. That night lying in the barracks, I realized I couldn't just wait for it to fade. So I started writing, small at first. Dates, times, words, he said, the way his hands looked when he shoved me, the exact angle of the parking lot lights, the bruise on my cheek, the medic's name, Torres's voice. Everything. I didn't know if I'd ever use it, but I needed a record, a way to make sure that if the day ever came, I'd have the truth laid out like a blade. I slipped the notebook under the lining of my footlocker. My silent dossier. Meanwhile, Ryan was thriving. Photos from the ceremony circulated through internal channels. His name was posted on bulletin boards with glowing commendations. He was the perfect story. Sergeant First Class Archer, model soldier, big promotion, clean record. My stepmother gushed about him to anyone who would listen. "He's worked so hard for this," she said. "He's always been the strong one." And I stood in the background, bruised and silent, the inconvenient detail that didn't fit their narrative. 2 days after the ceremony, I crossed paths with Staff Sergeant Torres outside the motor pool. He gave me a long look, one that wasn't pity, but wasn't neutral either. He'd seen what happened. I knew it. He knew it. Neither of us said a word at first. Then he muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "He's not untouchable, you know." I met his eyes, but he walked away before I could say anything. That single sentence lodged itself in my chest. Not untouchable. The silence started to feel heavier after that. At work, I went through motions, but my mind kept circling that night. I replayed the headlights, the rain, the way his voice cracked with rage. Every time I brushed my hair, my fingers grazed the bruise. It wasn't just the pain. It was the reminder that the world around me didn't care. I was an officer. He was a sergeant first class with a shiny new promotion. People saw him as the golden one. And me, I was the woman with family drama. I didn't tell command, I didn't tell friends, but I didn't erase it either. I wrote more. I printed copies of the photos I took of my face in the mirror. I saved the hospital bracelet. I noted the exact time of my release. Every detail went into the file. If this was going to stay buried, it wouldn't be because I hadn't built the truth brick by brick. A week passed before someone finally asked the question. Captain Ethan Morales, CID liaison. He wasn't the type to hover. He was quiet, watchful. We'd crossed paths before on base, usually during briefings, never anything personal. But that morning, he intercepted me outside the admin building, his eyes flicking to the bruise that had already begun to yellow. Rough week, he asked, voice neutral but steady. I gave the practiced answer. Slip. Wet pavement. He didn't blink. Right, he said, but his tone carried something different. Not disbelief exactly. More like quiet calculation. Funny thing, he added lightly. Torres filed a note about something he saw in the parking lot that night. He didn't give details, but he flagged it. You know how rare that is, right? My breath hitched slightly, but I forced a shrug. I don't know what he thought he saw. Morales tilted his head, studying me like he could see every lie I was trying not to tell. Sure, he said, stepping aside. But if you ever decide to talk, make sure you do it before someone else tells your story for you. Then he walked off, leaving me standing in the humid morning air, my heart pounding. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't let myself see before. Silence wasn't safety. It was a cage. It protected him. It made me invisible, but it also left the door open just wide enough for someone like Morales to step through. And for the first time since that night, the thought didn't terrify me. It burned. The thing about silence is that it makes strategy sharper. I spent the first 3 nights after the hospital lying awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the bruise on my jaw pulse like a heartbeat. Ryan thought he'd won. I could see it in the way he walked through the house, like nothing had happened, the way he joked with neighbors, the way he adjusted his new Sergeant First Class insignia in the mirror. He believed my silence was surrender. That was his first mistake. The second was thinking I didn't know how the Army worked. I'd spent years watching how stories get buried and how the right kind of evidence can crack them wide open. He thought I'd stay the quiet sister. He didn't know I was already building something. I found Captain Ethan Morales outside the CID office 2 days later. He was leaning against a railing, coffee in one hand, files in the other. He saw me before I spoke. I was wondering when you'd show up, he said calmly, like we'd already had this conversation. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I need help, I said. His eyes narrowed slightly. Footage, I nodded. Parking lot behind the officers' quarters. 20 May. Between 2000 and 2030. There should be cameras. He finished his coffee slowly. If there are, and if it shows what I think it does, it won't just disappear. But you need to understand what happens if you open this door. There's no closing it after. I met his eyes and said I know exactly what I'm opening. The next afternoon, we were sitting in a small, dimly lit CID viewing room with a monitor in front of us. He inserted the drive, pressed play, and there it was. Grainy but clear enough. Ryan standing in the rain. Me stepping back, his hand slamming into my shoulder. My head snapping against the hood. Me hitting the ground. The angle didn't show my face clearly, but it didn't have to. The violence was plain. When the footage ended, Ethan leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. That's not a scuffle, he said. That's an assault. And that's your stepbrother. This is going to get ugly. I stared at the frozen image on the screen, Ryan's face twisted in fury. And for the first time since that night, my hands didn't shake. Good, I said quietly. The first official step wasn't shouting or demanding. It was paper. I filed an incident report with CID attaching a copy of the footage and requesting confidentiality under Army regulation. Ethan helped me structure it cleanly. No emotional language, no family drama, just facts. Time, date, location, injuries, medical record, the footage file number. I knew the bureaucracy well enough to understand that emotion gives them something to dismiss. Facts leave no room to breathe. Then came Torres. I found him behind the motor pool during a late shift, leaning against a truck smoking quietly. When he saw me approach, he nodded once like he'd been expecting this. You saw everything I said. Yeah? he replied. I did. His voice was even, but his jaw was tight. I can't pretend I didn't. You need a statement. Yes, I said. But I won't drag you into this if you're not ready. He flicked his cigarette to the ground. You're not dragging me anywhere. He crossed a line. I'll back it. His witness statement gave the report weight. Combined with the footage and the medical records, it wasn't just a story anymore. It was a case file. A ticking clock Ryan didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, I kept my silence at home. I went through the motions like nothing had changed. My stepmother made her usual passive-aggressive remarks about my attitude. Ryan strutted around like the star soldier. He didn't suspect a thing. That was part of the plan. The less he knew, the louder the truth would sound when it finally landed. Every night after everyone slept, I updated my dossier. I added copies of the incident report, timestamps, CID contacts, and internal regulation references. I learned long ago that the system moves slow unless you give it something it can't ignore. I wasn't building a complaint. I was building a wall he wouldn't climb over. The second part of the plan was quiet positioning. I didn't run to Jag with a speech about justice. I asked questions, precise questions, questions that made people take notes. I sat in Captain Morales's office, the light flickering against the blinds, and went over my options. Article 128. Assault consummated by a battery. Potential charges. Procedures for when the accused and victim are family members within the service. How Jag handles internal exposure. He laid it all out like chess moves. You're not just going after a man, he said. You're going after the image he built. This will get loud. I stared at the wall where commendation plaques lined up like trophies. That's the point, I said. Ryan was still riding his promotion high. I watched him at a weekend barbecue the unit threw. He laughed loudly, slapped shoulders, told stories about leadership and sacrifice like he hadn't thrown me against a car. Everyone around him believed the version of him they saw. But image is fragile. It takes one crack to make it crumble. And I was holding the hammer. When the formal complaint was filed, I sent it directly through official channels. No family, no informal backdoors. Jag received it on a Wednesday morning. Ryan had no idea. That same day, I met Morales again. He slid a printed copy across the desk. It's in, he said. It's clean. They'll have to open a preliminary inquiry. I traced the words on the page with my fingertips. My name. His name. The words assault and evidence in bold letters. I didn't tell my stepmother. I didn't warn Ryan. He had spent years controlling every narrative in that family. I wasn't giving him this one. I moved through the house like a shadow, letting him believe the silence meant surrender. The night after filing, he passed me in the hallway and smirked. You're quiet these days, he said. Guess you learned. I looked at him, my voice calm. Yeah, I learned. He didn't hear the storm in that sentence. The last piece was preparation. I didn't want this to be a whisper in an office. I wanted it to be undeniable. The footage was secure in CID archives, but I made encrypted copies. The statement from Torres was notarized through the legal office. My medical records were certified. I built layers of protection around the truth because I knew what he would do when it surfaced. He would try to twist it to call it family drama to make me look unstable. But I wasn't going in unarmed. The bolder move came quietly. I began feeding small, precise pieces of information to the unit's internal media liaison. Not gossip. Facts. There had been an incident involving an SFC after the promotion ceremony. There was CID involvement. I didn't give names, just enough to ensure that when the news eventually reached the right ears, it would land with a shock. Soldiers talk. Rumors travel faster than official memos. When it finally became public, I wanted people to already be listening. I worked in silence. Ryan celebrated loudly. Every day that passed tightened the wire. When Morales called me in and told me the inquiry had been approved, I didn't flinch. He'll get notice soon, he said. They'll interview him. He won't see this coming. I nodded. Good. At home, the dynamic hadn't changed on the surface. My stepmother poured coffee and reminded me to keep the peace. Ryan bragged about new responsibilities. I let him talk. The more confident he got, the harder the fall would be. Every smile he gave, every laugh at my expense, Every careless remark about my weakness, it all stacked up behind the silence I wore like armor. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about precision, about making sure when the truth landed, it didn't just bruise him. It buried the image he'd built around himself. And when that happened, there would be no rewriting the story. There would only be the footage, the statements, and the sound of a door closing behind him. The air inside the briefing room was nothing like the air outside. It was sharp cold and still, like everything in it had been carved down to edges. Fort Liberty had seen hundreds of meetings in this space, some about deployments, some about investigations, some about things no one talked about again once the door closed. But this wasn't a mission brief. This was a reckoning. I sat at one end of the long rectangular table uniform, pressed jaw steady heart, hammering so hard it felt like it echoed through my collar. On the opposite side sat Ryan, Sergeant First Class Archer. His uniform gleamed. His ribbons caught the light. He looked like the model soldier they'd always praised him to be. He leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone convinced they were untouchable. Beside him sat my stepmother, legs crossed, pearls around her neck, looking like she'd been invited to a garden party instead of a disciplinary hearing. She wasn't supposed to be here, but Ryan had insisted on bringing family support. It was the kind of move he always made. Appearances mattered to him. They always had. At the head of the table sat the commanding officer, flanked by the legal officer from JAG. Captain Ethan Morales leaned against the wall near the monitor, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. His presence wasn't loud, but it was solid, the kind of quiet that fills a room. My hands rested on the table. Ryan tapped his fingers against his knee like he was bored. The CO cleared his throat, and the room fell into a heavier kind of silence. "We're here today to address allegations brought forward involving an incident that took place on the evening of May 20th, he said. Both parties have been given the opportunity to submit statements. We will review the evidence, including video footage and witness testimony." Ryan tilted his head just slightly, as if the word allegations amused him. My stepmother leaned toward him, whispering something I couldn't hear but could guess. Probably a reminder that family stays united, that we keep things quiet, that I should have let this go. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the CO. Sergeant Archer, the JAG representative, said, voice crisp, "You have provided a written statement asserting that no physical altercation took place and that your stepsister suffered injuries as a result of slipping on wet pavement. Is that correct?" Ryan nodded, smooth as always. "That's correct, sir. It was raining that night. She slipped. I tried to help her up." His tone was calm, controlled, rehearsed. He was good at this. He'd had a lifetime of getting away with things because people liked how he looked when he denied them. Then the JAG officer turned to me. "Lieutenant Archer, you've provided a conflicting account supported by a witness and video evidence." "Yes, sir," I said, my voice steady. I did. Ryan didn't even flinch. He looked like a man waiting for a bad joke to be over. He thought this was just going to be another situation where I got quiet and he walked away untouched. That was his second mistake. Ethan moved from the wall to the monitor and plugged in the external drive. The room darkened slightly as the blinds clicked shut. The screen flickered once, then twice, before the parking lot came to life. Grainy black and white, but clear enough to see every movement. Me standing near my car, the headlights cutting through the rain. Ryan stepping closer, his hand slamming into my shoulder, my head snapping against the hood, my body crumpling to the ground. The silence that followed wasn't the usual kind. It was the kind that crawls up your spine and squeezes your lungs. The footage played out like it had that night. Slow, relentless, honest. When it ended, the only sound was the soft hum of the monitor. Ryan didn't move. His stepmother's hand dropped from his arm. Her face, usually poised and polished, froze mid-expression. Her eyes flicked to me, then to him, then back to the screen as if trying to rewrite what she had just seen. The CO leaned forward, hands clasped, face carved from stone. "Sergeant Archer," he said slowly, each syllable deliberate. "Would you like to amend your statement?" For the first time since I walked into the room, Ryan's mask cracked. It wasn't big, just a small tightening of his jaw, a flash of red, crawling up his neck. But it was enough. "Sir, he started, but the CO cut him off. "We saw the footage, Sergeant. This isn't a debate. That's you on camera. That's your hand. That's her head hitting the car. We're not here to discuss family misunderstandings. This is assault." My stepmother finally found her voice. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice sharp but shaking. "Ryan would never." The CO didn't even look at her. "Ma'am, this is a military proceeding. You are not a participant. Remain silent or step outside." She closed her mouth, but the shock stayed on her face like a slap. Ryan sat stiff now, hands clenched on the table. The smirk was gone. All that confidence he wore like armor began to crack under the weight of reality. The JAG officer spoke next, crisp and clear. "Based on the evidence presented, command has grounds to initiate an Article 128 investigation for assault consummated by a battery. Effective immediately. Sergeant Archer is suspended from duties pending further inquiry. He is prohibited from contact with Lieutenant Archer. A no-contact order will be issued before close of day." The words hung in the air like a gavel hitting wood. Ryan's face drained of color. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. For once, the truth spoke louder than anything I could have said. Ethan didn't look at me, but I felt the quiet weight of his presence like an anchor keeping me steady. Ryan turned his head toward me, finally eyes wide, not with rage this time, but disbelief. He had built his entire life on the certainty that no one would ever expose him, that I would never expose him. That was his final mistake. My stepmother reached out for his hand, but he didn't take it. He sat there staring at the table like if he stayed still long enough it would all go away. It wouldn't. The CO stood the chair legs scraping against the floor. "This meeting is adjourned," he said. "Sergeant Archer, you will report to the legal office immediately. Lieutenant Archer, you will remain available for follow-up interviews with JAG." Dismissed. As people stood, the air shifted. The officers in the room didn't look at him the same way anymore. The weight of the footage hung on every pair of eyes. Torres sitting quietly near the door as the witness met my gaze once and gave a small nod. A silent confirmation that the truth had landed. I walked out of that room without looking back. Ryan had spent years forcing everyone to see him as a hero. In 1 minute and 37 seconds of footage, the hero was gone. What happens when the truth finally hits the room? It doesn't whisper. It detonates. The silence after a storm doesn't always come gently. Sometimes it arrives like a blade slicing through everything that used to hold steady. Ryan's world started to fall apart the moment that meeting ended. Word spreads fast on a base faster than any official memo. By the next morning, half of Fort Liberty had already heard about the footage. They didn't know every detail, but they knew enough. Sergeant First Class Archer, the Golden Soldier, was under investigation for assaulting his stepsister. The headline wrote itself in whispers long before it landed on paper. The legal order came down within 24 hours. Ryan was officially suspended from duty pending investigation. The promotion that had inflated his ego like a parade balloon was frozen. His clearance was flagged. His access was revoked. He was no longer the man standing front and center on the parade field. He was the man being escorted out of his unit's office with 2 MPs walking behind him. I watched it from a distance, standing by a row of Humvees as the wind whipped against the flag. His posture wasn't as straight as it had been that night on stage. His chin wasn't lifted. His jaw was tight, his eyes forward, but I could see the tremor in the way his hands clenched. He knew the entire base was watching, and for the first time in his life, he couldn't control the narrative. The official investigation from JAG started immediately. Interviews, statements, evidence reviews. Ethan handled the coordination with quiet precision. Torres gave his full testimony without hesitation. The footage was cataloged secured, stamped into the case file like a steel nail. Ryan tried to stall. His lawyer tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a family argument blown out of proportion. But the footage didn't bend, the statements didn't blur, and the bruises hadn't lied. When command froze his pay incentives and stripped him from leadership responsibilities, the reality hit him harder than the rain that night. The hero of the unit was no longer a hero. Back home, my stepmother's mask cracked almost as fast as his reputation. She tried to blame me at first. She whispered sharp little sentences over breakfast words meant to dig under the skin. If you'd just stayed quiet, if you hadn't pushed him, if you hadn't humiliated him. But the news started circling. It wasn't just inside the base. A few lines in the Internal Stars and Stripes update mentioned the case Sergeant First Class Archer under investigation for alleged assault pending formal Article 128 review. It wasn't graphic. It didn't name me, but it named him. And that was enough to make the polished edges of their world crumble. She stopped blaming me after that. She turned on him. The night she finally snapped, I heard them through the thin walls of the house. Her voice was sharp shaking. "You ruined everything," she hissed. "Everything you worked for. Everything I supported. All those years, all that pride, and you threw it away over your temper." Ryan didn't shout back. He never did with her. He just stayed silent, which somehow made it worse. She was realizing the same thing he was, that the Archer name didn't shine anymore. It burned. On base, his fellow NCOs stopped shaking his hand, stopped sitting with him in the mess hall. They didn't have to say it out loud. I saw it in the way they looked at him like a man who'd tripped on a landmine of his own making. Ryan had built his identity on being the untouchable golden boy, the one who lectured others about discipline and respect. But when the truth came out, respect vanished. That's the thing about the military. They can overlook a lot, but they don't overlook weakness in the places they worship strength. He walked into the gym one morning like he always did, trying to pretend the world hadn't changed. Normally, people greeted him. That day, the weight of silence followed him like a shadow. 2 younger soldiers walked past without nodding. A staff sergeant turned his back mid-set. Torres passed him without a word. It was louder than shouting. It was exile. At home, he paced a lot. He stopped making eye contact. My stepmother's perfect posture wilted. She stopped mentioning him in phone calls. She started drinking wine earlier in the day. The house that once revolved around his orbit felt like a ship slowly taking on water. I barely spoke to either of them. I spent most of my time on base doing my job, walking through the same hallways where he used to command attention. Now those hallways whispered his name like a cautionary tale. One morning I walked into the common room and saw a folded copy of the base newsletter sitting on the coffee table. The headline wasn't dramatic, just a small column on the second page. Investigation continues in Article 128 assault case involving Fort Liberty SFC. It didn't need more. Everyone already knew the story. A younger private glanced at the paper and muttered to his buddy man, "That's messed up." They didn't know I was standing there. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the talking now. He tried to call me a few times during those first weeks. I ignored him. He cornered me once in the hallway outside the legal office, his uniform stripped of rank insignia, his eyes red from sleeplessness. "Sloane," he said, his voice hoarse, "you could end this. Just say it was a misunderstanding. You know I didn't mean to. I cut him off. You hit me." He flinched like the words themselves had weight. "I lost my temper," he said. "It was one night, one mistake. You're really going to destroy my entire career over that." I stared at him. "No," I said softly. "You did that yourself." He opened his mouth to speak, but I stepped past him without looking back. There was a time when that sentence would have scared me. It didn't anymore. Over the next few weeks, the investigation tightened around him. Command meetings, legal briefings, more interviews. Ethan kept me updated, not in detail, but enough to let me know the system was actually moving. Ryan's lawyer tried to push for a character defense, but the footage cut through it like a knife. He tried to use family, but my stepmother's support had already cracked under pressure. I knew she'd eventually choose self-preservation over loyalty. She always did. The final blow wasn't loud. It came in a simple memo. The Army rescinded his promotion status. His leadership position was permanently revoked. His name was removed from the list of those under consideration for future advancement. It was the kind of punishment that hurt more than a court sentence. For a man like Ryan Archer, losing the image was worse than losing the rank. When I saw him after that, he wasn't wearing his uniform. He was standing outside the house in a plain gray t-shirt, staring at nothing. The arrogance had drained out of him, leaving something hollow. My stepmother stood at the kitchen window, arms crossed, watching him with that mix of bitterness and quiet blame. She didn't defend him anymore. She barely spoke to him. The family they built on control and performance had finally cracked. I walked past him without stopping. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. We both knew what had happened. He had spent years teaching me that silence meant power, but it was my voice and the truth behind it that stripped everything away. The golden soldier was gone. In his place was a man everyone whispered about, but no one stood beside. Revenge didn't need shouting. Justice didn't need a stage. Sometimes it's just a slow, relentless unraveling. And Ryan Archer was finally unraveling. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sky over Fayetteville turns a dull, heavy gray, pressing down on everything below. I was standing on the train platform in uniform, the same place where everything had started weeks before. The same iron benches, the same sound of distant freight trains rolling through the same sharp smell of cold metal and diesel. But the woman standing there now wasn't the same. I had come to this station once out of kindness. I was standing here now out of clarity. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Heavy, hesitant. Ryan had never walked hesitantly a day in his life until now. When I turned, he was standing at the edge of the platform, hands jammed deep in the pockets of a hoodie, looking nothing like the man who'd strutted across the promotion stage. His shoulders slumped, his face drawn. The weight of everything he'd lost clung to him like wet clothes. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence between us thick with everything that had already been said, and everything I refused to say again. "Sloane," he said, finally, his voice cracking slightly around the edges. It didn't sound like him. It sounded smaller. He took a few steps closer. Not too close, just enough to make sure I was listening. "I've tried to reach you." I didn't answer. I just waited. He swallowed hard, like the words hurt to form. "I know I messed up. I know that night. I can't take it back." He dragged a hand over his face. "But you could help me. If you drop the complaint. If you say it was just a family misunderstanding. They might reduce the penalty. I could get reassigned. I could rebuild everything." There it was. The real reason. Not remorse. Survival. He wasn't here to confess. He was here to bargain. He kept talking words tumbling over themselves. "I can't fix what happened, but I can change. You know me. You know I worked for this my whole life. One moment shouldn't erase everything I've done. I've lost everything, Sloane. My career, my reputation. I cut him off quietly. You lost it because you hit me." The wind carried the words between us, sharp as the whistle of an approaching train. He flinched like I'd struck him. "I didn't mean to," he said weakly. "You pushed me. You always push me." I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. "No," I said. "You chose violence. You always have. And every time someone covered for you. But not this time." He stepped closer now, desperation rising in his voice. "Please, Sloane, please. I can't be the guy everyone whispers about. I can't live like this. I need you to help me fix it." I looked at him, really looked at him. This wasn't the soldier who strutted through formations. This was a man stripped of the armor his ego had built. But that didn't make him innocent. It just made him exposed. "You want me to fix it for you," I said, "the way everyone always has. You think if I stay quiet, the world will go back to what it was. But it won't. That version of you is gone, Ryan." The train horn sounded in the distance, low and steady, rolling toward the platform. I stood my ground as he took another step closer. "Please," he whispered, voice cracking for real now. "I'm begging you. I can't end like this. Not because of you." That's when I felt the cold clarity slide into place. I had spent years being the quiet one, the one they blamed, the one expected to make peace, but not anymore. I squared my shoulders, straightened my posture, and looked him in the eye. "No, Ryan, actions have consequences." He froze. The sound of the approaching train grew louder, filling the air between us. His knees hit the concrete a second later, as if the words themselves had knocked the last bit of fight out of him. He dropped his head, his breath coming uneven, a broken sound that might have been a sob. People on the far end of the platform glanced over, but no one moved closer. No one came to help him. That was his fall to own. I didn't look away. I didn't feel sorry. I didn't feel triumphant either. Just calm. Cold, clean calm. He had built this moment with his own hands, and now he was kneeling in it alone. The train roared into the station brakes, screeching. I adjusted the strap on my uniform bag and stepped forward past him toward the open doors. He didn't reach for me. He just knelt there, shoulders shaking, his breath fogging the cold air. I didn't turn around. I didn't offer him forgiveness he hadn't earned. I didn't offer him a hand out of the hole he'd dug. I just stepped onto the train and let the doors close behind me. His figure blurred through the window as the platform slid away. For once, I wasn't the one carrying the weight of what he'd done. He was. And it was exactly where it belonged. Peace doesn't arrive like a parade. It doesn't march in with banners or applause. It slips in quietly like the sound of wind sliding through tall buildings in the early morning. 6 months after the hearing, my orders came through. A transfer to Washington, D.C. Public Affairs Office Department of the Army. A promotion that didn't just move me out of Fort Liberty, but lifted me out of the shadow Ryan had cast for years. I packed my duffel in silence, folding each piece of my uniform with the kind of precision that comes from both habit and healing. My name tag caught the soft light through the window, clean and unburdened. Sloane Archer, no longer defined by someone else's chaos. When the day came to leave North Carolina, the air was crisp, the kind that bites at your cheeks and makes everything feel sharper. I stood in front of my car for a long minute, staring at the place that had held so much pain, so much tension, and finally justice. The base wasn't different. I was. I walked through the main gate with my head higher than it had been in years. No glances of pity, no weight on my shoulders. Just quiet. Washington was a different rhythm entirely. The city never really sleeps. It hums. It pulses with quiet authority, as if every street corner carries a decision that might shift something bigger than itself. My first morning walking into my new office at the Pentagon, I felt the difference in the air. Here, people didn't look at me and see Ryan's stepsister. They saw First Lieutenant Archer Public Affairs Officer, competent, professional, unattached from the mess that came before. One afternoon, 3 weeks into the new assignment, a letter arrived on my desk. Real paper, real handwriting. In an age of emails and signatures, that alone made it feel heavier. The letter was from a veterans housing organization. They'd heard about the night at Fayetteville Station, about the man I stopped for. They didn't talk about the violence that followed. They talked about the act before it, the moment that mattered to them. They wrote about dignity, about kindness, about the ripple effect that starts when one person decides to see someone the world ignores. At the bottom, in neat cursive, were the words, "Thank you for remembering us." I traced the ink with my fingertips, and something in my chest went quiet. A few days later, my stepmother called. Her number flashed on the screen, familiar and distant, all at once. I watched it buzz on the desk for a full minute before letting it go dark. I didn't owe her my voice. Not after years of silence that only protected him. Not after the way she turned on me the moment the truth became inconvenient. The call came again the next day, and the day after. Each time I let it fade. She wasn't calling for me. She was calling to clean a stain she'd helped create, and I had no obligation to help her wash it away. I learned to love the quiet routines again. Early morning runs along the Potomac, coffee in hand, boots hitting the pavement before the city fully woke. No one knew my story here. No one whispered my name in hallways. There was a freedom in that anonymity. The Army can be loud with judgment, but it can also give you the gift of starting over if you fight for it. Some nights I'd catch the reflection of my own face in the metro window and think about the woman I was at that train station months ago. The one standing in the cold with a scarf in her hands, choosing kindness even though she knew it would cost her. She hadn't known how much it would cost. She also hadn't known how strong she would become because of it. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back meetings, I took a different route home. The train station was quieter than usual, the winter wind cutting sharper than before. I was walking down the platform when I saw him. Not Ryan. A man sitting alone on the bench, back hunched jacket threadbare against the cold. His hands were tucked into his sleeves, his gaze fixed somewhere far away. His boots were worn. His shoulders were those of someone who'd once carried the weight of uniform. It didn't take much to recognize the quiet posture of a veteran trying not to be seen. For a moment, everything froze in a way that wasn't frightening anymore. Just familiar. A moment I understood, down to the marrow. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the wool gloves I kept there for days like this. They were warm, thick, practical. I walked toward him slowly, the way you approach someone who's been ignored too long. When I stopped in front of the bench, he looked up startled at first. His eyes were tired but alert. "Cold night," I said softly. He nodded. I held out the gloves. "These might help." For a second, he didn't move, like he was trying to figure out what I wanted from him. But then he took them slowly, reverently, as if the gesture itself was heavier than the fabric. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, voice rough soft. "I don't have much, but—" I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything." It wasn't about owing. It wasn't about performing kindness like a statement. It was about choosing it over and over, even after the world tried to make me believe it was weakness. As I walked away, I glanced back once. He was sitting a little straighter, his hands no longer shaking as badly. A tiny shift in the world, almost invisible, but real. My life didn't turn into some cinematic ending after Ryan fell. There was no loud celebration, no speeches. But there was something better. There was room to breathe, to live, to work, to build a career that was mine alone. I became good at my job. I earned trust on my own name. I learned to speak in rooms where no one doubted I belonged. Sometimes when I walk past that same DC platform in the early evening, I remember the exact sound of the Fayetteville station the night everything changed. The chill in the air, the weight of a scarf leaving my shoulders, the sound of his voice sharp and angry. But that memory doesn't own me anymore. It's just a piece of my story. One that shaped me, not one that defines me. Ryan never called again after that day at the station. I heard through official channels that he accepted an other than honorable discharge. No rank, no pension, no commendation, just a clean cut from the institution he thought would always protect him. My stepmother eventually stopped calling too. They both faded into the background like static on an old radio. Not gone, just no longer something I had to tune into. On my desk at work next to my nameplate sits a small brass coin engraved with Semper Fi, a gift from a retired Marine who heard about what happened and said it reminded him of a promise. I keep it there not because I need a reminder of that night, but because it represents something bigger. A choice. A line I crossed when I refused to stay silent. The world didn't suddenly become soft, but I did become unshakable in ways I hadn't imagined. I understood what it meant to reclaim your name, to build a life not tied to someone else's cruelty. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace, and peace doesn't ask for permission. Sometimes on quiet nights, I walk by Union Station just to watch people. Soldiers heading home, civilians rushing through, veterans sitting on benches trying to disappear. And sometimes I stop. Sometimes I offer gloves or a sandwich or just a hello. It's not an act of penance, it's a promise to myself. A reminder that kindness doesn't make you weak. It just means you carry your strength differently. I don't think about Ryan much anymore. When I do, it's not with rage, it's with distance. He became part of a story that shaped me, but he doesn't own the ending. I do, and the ending is quiet. It's peace I built with my own hands. People think family means loyalty, but loyalty without respect is just a cage. That sentence has lived in my chest long after everything else faded. It isn't anger anymore. It isn't even grief. It's truth. Cold, clean, and unshakable. When I finally said it out loud for the first time standing in front of the mirror in my new apartment in DC, I realized I wasn't talking to Ryan. I wasn't talking to my stepmother. I was talking to the version of myself that spent years believing silence was strength. It wasn't. Silence was survival, but it was never freedom. Freedom came the moment I chose to speak. Sometimes people ask what justice feels like. They think it must be loud, triumphant, explosive. But for me, justice felt like stillness. Like walking through a station without flinching. Like looking at a bruise in the mirror and realizing it no longer has power. It felt like watching someone else carry the weight of their choices instead of carrying it for them. That's the part no one talks about. Justice isn't about getting even. It's about taking back what they stole. Your voice, your name, your peace. When I think about that night at the train station now, I don't think about the impact. I think about the moment before it, the choice to stop for a man in need. I knew it would cost me something, but I didn't know it would also build me into someone unbreakable. That's the irony of cruelty. It tries to crush you, but sometimes it only sharpens you. If this story were just about Ryan, it would have ended the night he fell to his knees at the station. But this story was never just about him. It's about the countless moments that come after. The way people look at you differently when you stop being silent. The way you start to breathe again without realizing how long you've been holding your breath. The way you find yourself walking down a street alone and feel safe in your own skin for the first time in years. That's what justice looks like in real life. It's quiet. It's deliberate. It's yours. I've learned that family doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes family is the battlefield. Sometimes it's the reason you learn to fight. And sometimes, like in my case, it's both. I don't owe Ryan forgiveness. I don't owe my stepmother explanations. What I owe myself is the life I build after them. A life that isn't defined by the violence of one night or the years of silence before it. A life built on something stronger than loyalty, respect for myself. I've stood in rooms where people whisper about him, and I've walked away without explaining a single thing. I don't owe them the story. I already lived it. I already bled for it. It belongs to me now. I choose where it goes. I choose who gets to hear it. I choose the ending. The truth is, honor has a price. It always has. Doing the right thing when it costs nothing doesn't define you. Doing the right thing when it costs everything does. I paid the price the night I stood against my own family, and I'd pay it again. Because what I got in return was everything I thought I'd lost: my voice, my dignity, my strength. If you're watching this and you've ever been in that place where silence feels safer than truth, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not weak for being quiet, but you are powerful the moment you decide not to be anymore. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just refuses to kneel. I don't know who needed to hear this tonight. Maybe it's someone who's still sitting at their own train station weighing the cost of one small act of courage. Maybe it's someone who knows exactly what it's like to be hurt by blood and told to stay loyal anyway. Maybe it's someone who's been told their pain doesn't matter because the person who caused it shares their last name. If that's you, listen carefully. Family is not a shield for cruelty. It's not a free pass for betrayal. You get to choose yourself. You get to walk away. And no one gets to take that from you. As I say this now, I can see it clearly. The cold air at the station, the weight of his rage, the sound of the train rolling in, and then me stepping forward anyway. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because fear wasn't going to decide my story anymore. This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about reclamation. About standing in the quiet aftermath and realizing you've survived something meant to break you. And surviving doesn't make you soft. It makes you unstoppable. So here's my question to you, the one watching, the one listening, the one who knows exactly what it means to carry family secrets like chains. What would you do if the person who hurt you was family? Would you stay silent to keep the peace, or would you choose the kind of peace that's earned in the storm's aftermath? I want to hear your answer. I want you to drop it in the comments below, because maybe someone else needs to see it. Maybe your courage will be the spark that pulls someone else out of their silence. Family doesn't define you. Your choices do. Your courage does. Your voice does. This is mine. What's yours?